Hello and welcome to this recording of a presentation that was originally given at the International Conference on Shaikh al-Ishraq and the Modern World. The title of this talk is Attaining Higher Knowledge in East and West, Comparing the Mysticism of Suhrawardi and Rudolf Steiner. As Europe was entering into a bloody conflict that would eventually be labeled a world war, Austrian-born German philosopher, writer, and esotericist Rudolf Steiner, along with his closest friends and students, laid the foundation stone for a special building in a small village in Switzerland. The building was a temple named after Steiner's longtime idol and intellectual hero, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The design had little to do with the church architecture common in Europe. Rather, it included two interlocking domes of unequal size, which, some scholars have suggested, was reminiscent of a Byzantine or Eastern style. The construction took place over the course of the First World War, and people from across Europe came to participate in this event. This included artists, for Steiner outlined a series of images to be painted on the cupolas of the two domes. The smaller cupola displayed a group of initiates, or wise masters from different cultures and regions, such as ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. In the center was a German figure holding a small child in his hand. Above the head of this figure, two great spiritual powers confronted each other: Ahriman, the archdemon from the Zoroastrian religion, and Lucifer, the angel of light from the Christian tradition. Steiner called this figure the German-Persian Initiate, meaning the German-Persian wisdom teacher or mystic. None of the other figures possessed this hybrid status. Only the German and the Persian were combined. In lectures to his fellow workers, Steiner explained that both the German and the Persian spiritual cultures were linked through their encounter with philosophical and spiritual dualism, a struggle between light and darkness, and the need to overcome this dualism. The child in the hand signified that a spiritual power with childlike qualities was needed to overcome the force of dualism, the birth of a new spirituality that Steiner said, quote, must result from the realization of this dualism, the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic, between which the human being must find balance, end quote. Steiner was not remembered as a proper philosopher in European intellectual history, but rather as a kind of popular mystic or esotericist at best, and as an irrational quack or madman at worst. The truth is that Steiner was indeed a philosopher, but it is simply that historically these two categories, mystical/esoteric and rational/philosophical, were thematized as incompatible in Western thought. Steiner was therefore excluded from the academic canon. This situation is changing, in part due to the development of the field of the academic study of esotericism. In connection with the discipline of religious studies, over and against the discipline of theology, the study of esotericism focuses on often marginalized currents of European thought referred to as esoteric. The word esoteric implies hidden, secret, or inner, and refers to forms of knowledge and types of religious experience. Esoteric currents tend to be grounded in an experiential religiosity and mysticism. Esotericism can take the form of magic, such as ilm a-sihr, but also a form of philosophical mysticism compared to irfan or hikmah, which the scholar Henri Corbin sometimes translated as theosophy. This paper compares the mystical philosophies of Rudolf Steiner and Suhrawardi in an effort to overcome the, at least in our opinion, erroneous bifurcation of mystical and rational forms of knowledge, and to approach the East-West binary in a new way. We ask the question, are there similarities between Steiner and Suhrawardi? There are indeed structural similarities in the philosophical projects of both thinkers, which, due to the space constraints of this presentation, we only briefly outline here. But by drawing such connections, we seek to uncover resonances and parallels, which, mutatis mutandis, may offer new avenues for cross-cultural exchange. Steiner grew up in a working-class environment in Kraljevec, Austria-Hungary, which is in modern-day Croatia. He received a doctorate in philosophy from Rostock University in Germany and made a name for himself editing Goethe's scientific papers, as well as writing for local periodicals and editing a literary magazine. At the time, he also wrote a philosophical treatise entitled The Philosophy of Freedom, which was intended to refute the Kantian categorical imperative and the phenomenal and noumenal divide. At the turn of the century, Steiner joined the Theosophical Society, an international spiritual confederation founded by a Russian mystic, Helena Blavatsky, and Henry Steele Olcott. This decision essentially ended his professional career. He began working enthusiastically as the general secretary of the German branch of the Theosophical Society. The aims of the society included the re-spiritualization of the West by reintroducing esoteric and Eastern ideas into mainstream culture. Steiner eventually broke away to establish his own esoteric society in 1913, which he called the Anthroposophical Society, the name taken from the Greek words anthropos, or human, and sophia, wisdom, suggesting a human-derived wisdom that focused on the divine. It was for the Anthroposophical Society that Steiner and others built the Goethe Annum, in which was painted the German-Persian Initiate. Steiner lived at a time of crisis in Europe that witnessed a bewildering acceleration of advancements in technology, social reforms, the arts, religion, and science, all of which came to be identified with quote-unquote modernity. For some, these changes were experienced as a trauma and were thought to have severed the holistic connection between human beings and the natural world, a connection that had existed for millennia. For example, the idea of the micro and the macrocosm, by which everything was believed to be connected from God all the way down to the minerals, metals, plants, animals, etc. As a philosopher, Steiner attempted to heal this intellectual and spiritual division. He imagined new concepts while wholeheartedly embracing mysticism and esotericism as well. Referring to Steiner as a mystic is possible in the sense that, contrary to Kant, he believed that the numinous could be accessed through human cognition. While Steiner rejected the idea that he was practicing mysticism, but rather spiritual science, outsiders and those who are not students of anthroposophy, especially those who adhered to a positivistic form of science, often characterized Steiner in terms of mysticism and irrationality. Steiner, like many others at the time, believed that he had access to the noumenon, what he and other theosophists referred to as higher worlds or the Akashic records or the Akasha chronicles. In the minds of scientific colleagues and academics, Steiner did therefore appear as a mystic, even though he himself did not claim this. Personally, Steiner claimed a middle path between what he called dreamy mysticism and staunch materialism and rationalism. In other words, a spiritual science or philosophic mysticism that overcame the Plato-Aristotle duality. Such a project was not exclusive to Steiner but belongs to the history of esoteric discourse, and he outlined his own spiritual philosophy of graded levels of initiation for traversing the four higher worlds, a path of development that culminated in intuition, or direct revealed knowledge. Like Suhrawardi, he had an affinity for Plato over the strict rationalism of Aristotle, and yet he attempted to harmonize these seemingly competing philosophical streams. Steiner claimed to have had supernatural experiences from childhood, and these experiences culminated in a Christian mystical experience that he had in Berlin sometime around 1900. Following this experience, he integrated mystical and esoteric concepts more and more into his philosophy of freedom, claiming he had developed the ability to quote-unquote read, in other words, receive knowledge from, a higher realm of living images, which he referred to as the Akashic realm, a concept taken from the Theosophical Discourse. Steiner described this realm as the living memory surrounding the earth. In this realm, Steiner could and did speak with the living image of Goethe, for example, in order to receive special spiritual knowledge. According to Steiner, this path of development was centered on self-knowledge, and those who worked on themselves could develop their intuition to the point that they were granted mystical access to a realm of living images by exiting their physical body and inhabiting a celestial or subtle body. In this realm, ultimate truths were available. As he explained in his later editions of the Philosophy of Freedom, quote, "Intuition is the conscious experience in pure spirit of pure spiritual content," end quote. The spiritual/mystical revelation possible through intuition came first, in other words, in that it granted access to the realm of cosmic facts, i.e., purely spiritual content. From there followed a rational philosophy in which to ground these new concepts. In this system, the mystical/esoteric and the rational/materialistic, or shall we say Plato and Aristotle, were brought together again. In order to put such an approach to knowledge into practice, Steiner argued that a new form of science was required, a science he called Geisteswissenschaft, or spiritual science. In Suhrawardi's time, a number of Islamic thinkers were criticizing the prevailing school of peripatetic philosophy derived from Aristotle. According to Sayyid Yadullah Yazdanpanah, this turn from Aristotelian philosophy took on three forms. The first was a complete turning away to embrace mysticism, an approach represented by al-Ghazali. The second was a partial turning away toward theology, with the continued use of peripatetic philosophy as a support, an approach represented by al-Razi. The third was to remain fully grounded in philosophy while at the same time rejecting certain aspects of peripatetic philosophy in favor of a Platonic or emanationist system, even to introduce new concepts and ideas into such a system. This was the approach of Suhrawardi. Like Steiner, Suhrawardi attempted to heal the intellectual and spiritual problems of his time by embracing mysticism and developing a new form of science. He elaborated an additional realm of suspended but also living images, which Qutb al-Din and al-Shahrazuri later formulated into the concept of alam al-matal, the imaginal realm. In this realm, also for Suhrawardi, the angelic beings and deceased souls lived, those who continued to exist in celestial bodies. The imaginal realm was suspended between the highest realm of God, or Allah, alam al-Jabarut, and the physical or sensible world, alam al-Mulk. This realm was not only reached beyond death, but also during sleep and in meditative or prayerful practices. Furthermore, self-knowledge enabled the seeker to develop a special intuition which, similar to Steiner, produced mystical revelations about the true nature of reality. As for Steiner, intuitive knowledge was not only as real as rationally demonstrated principles, but in fact more real, in that it accessed a higher level of existence. For Steiner and Suhrawardi, the mystical experience came first, and the rational systematization followed. Such mystical moments of insight could involve interaction with living images. Whereas Steiner describes interacting with the image of Goethe, to whom he posed certain questions and received special information, Suhrawardi recounts a dream vision in which he interacted with the image of Aristotle and conversed with him in a state between waking and sleeping. Suhrawardi asks Aristotle if peripatetic philosophy is the true path to wisdom, and Aristotle replies that Sufi masters are in fact the true philosophers, possibly because the Sufi path leads to self-knowledge. Both Steiner and Suhrawardi believed that these mystic visions were not fantasy or delusion. Rather, they represented revealed intuitive knowledge, the fruits of acquiring insight into the nature of the self. Furthermore, a new science was required to account for this system of knowledge production. For Steiner, this was his spiritual science, or Geisteswissenschaft. For Suhrawardi, this was his science of lights. In the former, a complex hierarchy of angelic beings generated reality through a process of emanation. In the latter, an interconnected arrangement of immaterial and material lights performed the same function. Given the short space of this presentation, we have offered only a few points of comparison between Steiner and Suhrawardi. We have also suggested that incorporating the study of esotericism into discussions about resonances between Eastern and Western knowledges could offer a fresh perspective. For example, Israel Coren recently described Steiner's thought as philosophic mysticism, perhaps like that of what Robert M. Wallace presents in his book Philosophical Mysticism in Plato, Hegel, and the Present. Coren also draws on David Blumenthal's definition of philosophic mysticism as, quote, contact with the divine, whether it be initiated by the divine or by the human. And although it requires strict philosophical, intellectual preparation, the outcome of this contact is a flow of intellectual energy from the divine, generating an experience which will be abstract in quality and mystical in nature, end quote. Similarly, Hussein Nasr has characterized the illuminationist school of Suhrawardi as belonging to a tradition of philosophical mysticism in Persia. Here again appears Steiner's imagination of the German-Persian Initiate, which suggests an intriguing overlap and a potentially generative area for future comparative analysis. Thank you.